Is U.S. geopolitical strategy experiencing a monumental shift? This is authored by Mike Krieger via Liberty Blitzkrieg blog, and it's on Zero Hedge by Tyler Durden. The defining question about global order for this generation is whether China and the United States can escape Thucydides' trap. The Greek historian metaphor reminds us of the attendant dangers that when a rising power rivals a ruling power, as Athens challenged Sparta in ancient Greece, or as Germany did Britain a century ago. Most such contests have ended badly, often for both nations. A team of mine at the Harvard Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs has concluded after analyzing the historical record. In 12 of 16 cases over the past 500 years, the result was war. When the parties avoided war, it required huge, painful adjustments in attitudes and actions on the part not just of the challenger, but also the challenged. From Graham Allison's article, The Thucydides Trap, Are the U.S. and China Headed for War? So now for the past 2 years, my geopolitical assumption has been that the Trump administration would more or less continue along the reckless, short-sighted, and dangerous neocon, neoliberal interventionist foreign policy of the past 2 decades, focused on undeclared regime change and proxy wars across the world, especially the Middle East. Given his strange obsession with Iran, I figured he'd start a conflict there and that this conflict would end up a bigger disaster than Iraq. I assumed this mistake would coincide with continued massive deficits, an unwieldy debt load, and most likely a recession. In turn, I believe this would lead to an embarrassing and chaotic unraveling of the U.S. empire. At that point, other nations like China would opportunistically take advantage of the huge power vacuum left over. Based on a variety of events over the past few months, I'm no longer convinced this is how it's going to unfold. First, the article published by Bloomberg back in October, The Big Hack, How China Used a Tiny Chip to Infiltrate U.S. Companies, really grabbed my attention. If you haven't read it, I strongly suggest you go to do that, as I was immediately blown away by the implications. To summarize, the story purports that 17 sources in both government and the corporate world claim Chinese spies inserted a malicious microchip into supermicro servers, and that this affected nearly 30 companies, including tech behemoths Amazon and Apple. Equally incendiary, the article reports that Amazon and Apple knew about it, but never let the public know. Apple and Amazon and other vehemently denied it, and the Bloomberg story, as we see, and we will still don't know the truth about this, as I noted at the time. Either China really did compromise hardware and U.S. tech giants are actively covering it up, or unnamed sources invented a story to make China look nefarious in order to up the ante in the growing dispute between the two nations. We still can't be sure which one is true, but the end result is pretty much the same: greatly increased tensions with China. While I knew the Bloomberg story had wide-ranging implications, it wasn't enough to make me seriously consider the distinct geopolitical forecast. Then came the second major event, which was the arrest of Wanzhou Meng, the CFO of China's telecom giant Huawei, earlier this month. Importantly, she's much more than just an executive at a giant Chinese company. She's, quote, the daughter of the telecom's giant's founder, Ren Zhifei, an ex-officer of the People's Liberation Army. Ren is one of the country's most revered business figures, end quote. It's also worth mentioning that she was arrested while Trump was sitting down to dinner with Chinese President Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the G20 summit. I can't even imagine the level of anger this must have caused on the part of the Chinese. This made me realize that the trade war, quote-unquote, is just a prelude to a much bigger confrontation. Moving along, yesterday we learned of a sudden plan to withdraw all U.S. troops from Syria. And after this, I'm also going to make another video concerning the potential withdrawal of all U.S. troops from Afghanistan. So something is going on. going on with the article. I want to make it clear we don't know if this is just talk or will actually happen for a skeptical take like this, but if it does occur, it will make it increasingly likely that U.S. foreign policy has undergone a massive and monumentally significant shift. A shift away from failed regime change boondoggles in far-flung areas of the world Americans don't care about, to a very major and probably long-lasting confrontation with China itself. If this is in fact the case, it's impossible to overstate its significance. In my view, such a shift would signal that the U.S. has acknowledged the unipolar imperial world completely dominated by America is over and unrecoverable, and therefore resources will shift away from the silly dream of full-spectrum global dominance into a managed retreat. A managed retreat would be considered preferable since it could be done on U.S. terms as opposed to having the terms forced upon it. In other words, it would be a proactive foreign policy based on reality rather than a reactive one forced upon it by circumstances. This is not to say that any of this will be good or pleasant, but from the realpolitik perspective of those preoccupied with U.S. power in a most unipolar world, it's the most likely move. A realization that wars in the Middle East achieve no long-term objectives for the U.S. may finally have occurred. They just weaken the country, get the public annoyed, and waste enormous amount of money that could be spent elsewhere. Meanwhile, other countries just sit back and wait for America to fall over so they can pick up the pieces. Finally, it'll be almost impossible to sell the public on another major conflict in the Middle East. Selling the public on China as an adversary will be much easier. Today we saw further evidence of things heating up as Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein and FBI Director Christopher Wray announced the unsealing of an indictment against 2 accused Chinese hackers, as Ben Hunt of Epsilon Theory observed. Ben Hunt tweeted, "This is what you do to solidify domestic public opinion before waging a war, trade, or otherwise." CBS News tweets today's charges mark an important step in revealing to the world China's continued practice of stealing commercial data. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein says. There has been an ongoing crash in financial markets lately. Many people think this is just the market reacting to interest rate hikes in the midst of an economic slowdown and a realization that corporate profits have peaked. While that's undoubtedly a big part of it, I think there's more. I think gold is the real canary in the coal mine, and gold is starting to signal serious problems on the geopolitical front. I've noticed for a few weeks that gold has started to trade strong, in sharp contrast to the past 7 years. While it reversed and went lower after the hawkish Jay Powell did his thing yesterday, it did something unexpected today. As the stock market continued to plunge, gold reserves reversed all its losses and closed at a new near-term high. Gold is seeing beyond the simple economic issues and into the geopolitical realm, in my opinion. But what is gold telling us? I think it may be confirming the thesis outlined above, which is that the U.S. foreign policy is pivoting away from aimless wars all over the place in order to sustain the impossible dream of unipolar empire and towards a more singular goal focused on preventing China from dominating the globe in the decades ahead. If successful, the coming multipolar world may be characterized by a bifurcated global economy as outlined in a very interesting piece from Strategic Culture. America's technology and sanctions war will end by bifurcating the global economy. Michael Krieger tweets, "I believe financial markets are at the early stages of pricing in a major and prolonged confrontation between the U.S. and China. More on this in an upcoming post." And then he tweets, "Globalization, as we have all known, it is dead and buried, and it is not coming back. The future global economy will look completely different and will likely be far more balkanized." Of course, there's no way to know if I'm right about any of this, Just because it looks this way today does not mean it will play out that way in the future. Nevertheless, I've now seen enough to seriously consider that we may be entering an entirely new geopolitical environment dominated by vastly increasing tensions between the US and China. If so, it will likely last a lot longer than you think, as leaders in both China and the US will be looking for a scapegoat as their crony. Financialized economies struggle under unpayable debt and unimaginable levels of corruption. If you'd like to join me on my Patreon account, you will hear content not covered by mainstream media. These riveting stories will be based on my research, and I will state my opinions and give my personal insight on diverse and controversial subjects and world events not covered by mainstream media, and not supported by YouTube guidelines. So whatever I have on my Patreon, most of those will not be on my YouTube channel. Please consider becoming a member today. More of the most significant and important videos will be on my Patreon channel. Your support helps me to continue my research and keeps this YouTube channel alive. And we depend on your support, your generous charity, because we help economically challenged families here in Athens, Greece, in Kapota, and we also help the young generation with university tuition and the community around our church. Thank you.